Hey, today on the Beginner Photography Podcast, we are learning how to trust ourselves and our photographic instincts. So let's get into it.
Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast, a weekly podcast for those who believe that moments matter most and that a beautiful photo is more than just a sum of its settings. A show for those who want to do more with the gear they have to take better photos today. And now, your host, Raymond Hatfield.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to this episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. I am so excited that you are here. Today, we got a great episode for you, and I think that it builds pretty well on last week's episode on, gaining confidence in your photography when you're just getting started. Because today we're talking about learning how to trust yourself, because trust in yourself is a really, really big piece of the confidence pie chart, I guess you could say. Because when you know what it is that you're doing and you know the vision that you have for yourself, well, then you're just going to follow that. And then that's going to, again, build that confidence. So learning how to trust yourself, really important stuff here today. Super excited to get into this episode today with Dorie Howell. But first, I wanted to bring up, I just got to say, the past few weeks in the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group has been truly something unique. It has been something great. So we started the Facebook group years ago, I guess, maybe 5 years ago at this point. No, I think it's 4 years ago. And ever since then, the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook community has been a place for photographers to come in and share their questions that they have and their photos without any fear of judgment, of where you quote unquote should be as a photographer or what you quote unquote should know as a photographer. We understand that everybody's at a different point in your journey, and therefore we try to make it as enjoyable for everybody. A place where, even the newest person with a camera can come into the group and truly learn something about photography without fear of being judged. But again, it's just so great to see the mix of things that are being posted and questions that are being asked about in the community. So we've had photographers come in, pretty new to photography and share really great photos that they have come up with, these visualizations. They have an idea, they have a concept for a shoot, and then they go out and capture it. Like Jeremy came up with this great idea for a vegan hunter type shoot. So, if you're in the group, you know what I'm talking about. Go in and check it out if you're not. But it's just kind of pushing the boundaries of what is, how do you capture the thing that you see in your head, And photography really lets us do that, but it all comes down to, knowing your camera, knowing your settings, knowing your gear. And again, the community is a great place to be able to ask those questions if you have any questions about anything photography related. Like even, let's see, where is it? I just had it. Yeah, even Kevin. Kevin came in asking about the Dutch angle. So if you don't know what a Dutch angle is, it's where, your camera's not perfectly level. It's intentionally put at an angle. And he was like, I don't truly understand it. What's the point of this? And I made sure to chime in with my 2 cents there, which is that, this was pretty popular in the film days, long ago, not so much anymore. But I find a Dutch angle can be very helpful because a Dutch angle can let you create a brand new composition. And just like how having your camera low to the ground is visually interesting and having a photo from a drone is visually interesting, so is creating a Dutch angle. Now, within that same, sentiment there, not every photo should be taken from the ground or from a drone. So this is just one of those tools that you add to your bag of tricks, I suppose, to be able to capture more unique and compelling shots. Not that every photo should be taken at a Dutch angle, but I thought that was a really interesting question. And obviously other people did as well. A lot of people were chiming in on that one. Either they didn't get it or they loved it. But that's what this is all about. That's what the community is all about, is building and growing your knowledge of photography so that when you go out, you're going to be equipped and you're going to be ready and you're going to have the skills to be able to capture the photo that you see, that you have pre-visualized, I guess you could say. So again, wonderful, wonderful conversations. If you want to come in and join in on the Beginner Photography Podcast community, do so right now just by searching Facebook for Beginner Photography Podcast. You'll find it right there. You can request to join. I think there's only 2 questions just to prove that you're real and that you're really interested in photography. and that you're not going to spam the group with like sunglasses or, trying to sell weird stuff. So go ahead and come on in. We would absolutely love to have you. So with that, let's go ahead and get on into today's interview with Dorie Howell. Dorie Howell is she's been in the industry for quite a while. She primarily shoots families and newborns, and today she's ran a very successful business for multiple years. And today she's talking about learning to trust yourself and your instincts as a photographer, because there are times where you question what it is that you're doing behind the camera. But then also, for premium members, she shares a lot about the business side of it. And specifically, this is so great, she shares how to craft pretty much the perfect inquiry email. So if you have an inquiry form on your website and you're trying to get clients in front of the camera, you have a form. They say, hey, we're interested in photography. You send them this super long email with all the information that you've ever, put together to try to help them out, give them prices, and it can be very overwhelming. And I know from experience that can drive people away, and that's not what we want. So Dorie today talks about how to craft the perfect inquiry email, and that is just for premium members. So if you want to learn Dorie's secrets here to getting more responses to your emails, then be sure to become a premium member by heading over to beginnerphotographypodcast.com and click the premium membership button at the top of the page. So that is it. Why don't we go ahead and get on into this interview right now with Dorie Howell. Dorie, I really want to keep this simple. When did you know that photography was going to play an important role in your life?
Whew. I can narrow it down to, I don't remember the day and time, but I remember the image that I took.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a new mom at the time, and my husband, um, now I'm going to date myself here and say this was before cell phones had cameras and were used for almost everything else except for actually calling people. But we, I took a picture of my daughter standing in our front entryway, leaning against like the transom windows, and just the way the light hit her, it was more of a silhouette, that type of thing. And I snapped it, and it's still to this date one of my favorite pictures that I've taken of her. And I've named it "Waiting for Daddy."
Mm-hmm.
And it was at that point in time, I would say probably 12 years ago, where I decided, like, my heart just sang when I took that picture, and that was a changing point. I just dove feet first into everything photography, how to learn my gear, how to post process. I didn't even know that there were raw photos at that point in
Yeah.
time. I knew nothing at that point in time, and I just went for it, 100%.
So before this, what were you doing? Did you have any sort of creative aspirations before that, or did that photo like completely transform your life?
I was in school for vocal performance.
Oh, so yes, that
Yeah.
photo completely transformed your life. Yeah.
At that point in time, I had been running a private voice studio teaching people how to sing. I'd been doing that for about 5 years, and I was in school to complete my vocal performance degree because it was just something that I needed to cross off the list. I'm a singer. That's how I started singing when I was 5 years old. I've always been a singer. And so I had always had something very creative. And my mom was creative, and we were always involved in something creative. And so singing was my outlet. That's what got me through school. That's all of those things. I traveled the world with my voice. And once I had my child, I could see, living in the Washington, D.C. area, that I wasn't necessarily going to make any money with my voice. I could enjoy my voice, but running a studio or that type of thing was not going to get me financially where I wanted to be. And I think this is something that a lot of singers and a lot of creatives can really, really empathize with. Like, yeah, you want to do it, but how do you make money doing it? And I
Mm-hmm.
come from a very entrepreneurial background. My dad owned his own business. My mom worked in the business, very entrepreneurial in spirit. And I knew that I needed to make some cash. That's where it all came down to. So when photography came in, I started taking pictures of my child. And then I think it's the same story that a lot of other, I'll just stereotype it and say a lot of other young moms get into this. They have a child, they start taking pictures, and then they realize, oh, there's an art to this. There's an art to the posing, there's an art to the light placement. There's ways that I can do this to make it more beautiful. And then people start to notice, and then ask them to take pictures. And then all of a sudden you have a little side hustle going and you realize that you want to make it more. And that's where I was. That's how it all started.
So then, in the beginning, let's go back to that photo that you took of your
Mm-hmm.
daughter waiting for daddy. You think to yourself, oh my gosh, I can make this happen. Like, I love this photo. I want to go at this full time. At that point, I'm assuming that you were just shooting an auto. Like, when did the technical side of photography come in for you?
Well, you're right. I was just shooting an auto. Okay. So I had another friend who was a photographer as well. And I called her up and I said, hey, can you give me a few guidelines? Can you kind of point me in the right direction? This was before Facebook even. Facebook was just starting, like literally just starting. I think I created my Facebook account maybe 2 months before my daughter was born. And she said, yeah, there's these online forums you should go to check out this forum called ILP and check it out, and you can get a lot of information. And that's what I did. I just dove in and I realized, okay, I need to learn my camera settings. So I bought Brian Peterson's Understanding Exposure, which talked
Mm-hmm.
about the triangle, ISO, shutter speed, um, aperture, those types of things. And I learned how that triangle worked. And then I just practiced. I practiced and I practiced and I practiced. And then I got into the whole post processing side and played with actions for a little bit. That really didn't suit what I wanted to do because I wanted my images to be really clean and not look impacted by any sort of post processing.
Mm-hmm.
So I just played and I practiced and I played and I practiced, and I was a very keen observer to what people were saying in these forums. Even though I wasn't a wedding photographer, I would go in wedding threads and find out what they were talking about as far as lighting goes or posing or those types of things. And then I just practiced. That
Mm-hmm.
really was it. We'd be watching TV and I'd be sitting playing with my camera to make sure that I could change all the settings without having to look at it. And I would do that for hours. Just sit and play with the settings and go outside and do the exercises. Okay, so what does my picture look like if I do an f-stop of 2.8? What does it look like if I stop it down? What if I do it even more? What if I do it even more? How does that impact my images? And then I could go back and decide, okay, well, when I have someone in front of my camera, I can't go down to 2.8. I need to go up, like though or down, however you look at it when you're thinking about aperture, all those
Yeah.
different things. Um, I really just dove in, and practice was my biggest friend, and I wasn't scared. And I think going back to my previous life as a singer, where you're used to making mistakes in front of people, where you have to be comfortable putting yourself all out there, I'm totally comfortable making a mistake and taking a bad picture and realizing, okay, well, that didn't work. Let's try it a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And that whole trial and error aspect of just my personality, I think served myself very well when it came to photographer and to photography and being able to dive in and just see what worked and what didn't.
Yeah. I think, figuring out that whole thing of like, what doesn't work here when you see those photos, what
Yeah,
doesn't work here,
right.
that's a big thing. So for you to be able to tell yourself, like, that's totally okay. Now I just have to figure out what it is and move forward. So where you're at now with the technical skills and abilities to be able to capture, beautiful images. If you go back and you look at those first images, what were those mistakes that you were making, or what did you have a hard time to get a grasp on when it came to photography?
Well, I think because I thought photographing newborn babies would be easy. I thought, what do? They just lie there. It's easy. It's no big deal. Um, and so my first newborn session, talk about just not being clueless, was newborn twins.
Twins.
And I had no experience with flashes yet, no OCF experience or anything like that. Twins, and they lived in this tiny little townhouse with really no light. So not only was I dealing with the babies, and that's just a whole nother conversation. I was dealing with the technical aspect of trying to get enough light into my entry level DSLR that really could not handle bumping the ISO or anything like that. Like, because it was twins, I couldn't stop down to let enough light into the lens. So I had a lot of one baby in focus, one baby out of focus, like that type of thing. And it was just a disaster. And granted, I think some things that people forget when we're dealing with clients, we're taking pictures of the people that they love so much. So they don't see all those technical mistakes that we make.
Hmm.
But oh, that session was a nightmare. It was just from head to toe, it was a nightmare. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot in the process. I learned about babies. I learned about my equipment, what it could handle, what it couldn't handle, and lighting, and asking clients if I was going to go into their home, more questions about where I would be shooting, that type of thing, which made a big difference for the next time. Because the next
Hmm.
time I didn't have twins the next time, but I certainly didn't have any issues with equipment or anything like that because I was
Yeah.
better prepared.
Oh my gosh. So tell me, like, in what ways did your photography evolve after that? Obviously, you realized my camera has limitations, my lens might have limitations, the amount of light that I show up with, here's a limitation. So in what ways did your photography change directly following that?
Well, it didn't change directly following that because I wasn't put in that situation again for a very long time.
Hmm.
And I think just taking sessions, practicing, and realizing it's kind of hard to say, okay, distinctly what changed at that point in time. All I know is that I'm an evolving photographer. And every session I do, I strive to be better because that's my personality. I never sit back and say, I've done this before. This is going to be a piece of cake. I'm just going to
Hmm.
try everything like I did it last time. I'm constantly striving to be better. So I can't say specifically at that point what I did better because sometimes it takes a while to absorb what happened, especially in a situation like that. You have
Hmm.
to sit back and absorb it and then realize, okay, I need to change this for next time. I need to change this for next time. But a true business and game changing event for me was when I finally embraced off camera flash and studio photography.
Hmm.
Absolutely, because I can go into any any situation now and know that I can get a great image of the people who have hired me to photograph them. And it doesn't matter if they show up late and we're in a park, I can still get a great session. It doesn't matter if I'm walking into a tiny little townhouse in Georgetown with those Georgetown in DC. They have these tiny little windows, and literally the biggest light source is either a sliding glass door going out to the back door that they have, tables and all sorts of stuff in front of,
Of
so it's not
course.
really conducive to move, or it's the front door with it open, and that's really not great for a session either. But once I embraced traveling with my lights, getting over the hang up of it was a lot of gear to bring in, or it looked like a lot of gear to me to bring in. Once I got past that idea that I didn't need it and accepted that, yes, I need it for my business, I need it, the game totally changed.
Hmm.
And my
So
lighting setup is very simple. It's nothing complicated at all. It's one light, it's a big umbrella off to the side. It's nothing fancy at all. But once I embraced that, it totally changed.
what was it like getting into off-camera flash though? Because one thing that I hear from a lot of new photographers is they're scared. Like, first of all, they're having a hard enough time just getting a grip on their camera settings themselves, and now we want to
Yeah.
introduce flash in here. So what was that like for you?
Well, I cheated. I'll be totally honest. I'm a
How so?
cheater. I bought Pro Photo Lights with TTL
Hmm.
so I could just throw it up. And worst case scenario, throw it in a manual, and I know I'm going to get a good image. Now, do I do that all the time? No. In fact, I do it very, very rarely. But to know that I have that technology that can save me in tough times or in sticky situations is what I need. Personally,
Hmm.
that's what gives me the courage to take maybe a little bit of a risk because I know that if I take a few shots and they're just not working, I can be like, okay, hold on a second, click, 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 and I can get it back to where I need it to be. So my Pro Photo lights are something that I say, I'm going to be buried with my lights. I love my lights, and I'm not a like spokesperson for them or anything like that, but I did a lot of research on it and that's what I chose. So TTL technology was huge for me. And then I got to be in situations where I know my settings for certain situations. I know when I go into a studio that they need to be set at my starting point is here. And then adjust it from a certain point. So you just, it's like with time, like I said, it's just baby steps, time, experience, where you start to get to know your equipment, you get to know your most of the situations that you're in, you get to trust yourself a little bit more, and then all of a sudden you realize you're doing it seamlessly without even really have to think about it. But it takes a little
Yeah.
time to get there.
And that makes sense. That's kind of like with everything, though, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, but there's this. I don't know if you feel the same way, but like there's this misconception I think with photography where because it's so readily available in a phone, or
Yeah.
there's just this idea that it's easy. But I think, you know, with anything, if you're gonna give it a real shot,
Right.
you very quickly realize how not easy it can be. But the more
Right.
reps that you put in, the better it is that you're gonna get.
And no one's perfect the first time. I mean, everything in life is a process. So you look at a newborn baby or a toddler who's learning to walk. They just don't get up and walk across the room. Like, they need a lot of encouragement. They fall down a lot of times. They, fall to the side, they fall back, they fall on their face, and we're always around there hovering, trying to protect them so they don't hurt themselves when they fall, but they always get up. And I think that's something as adults we forget, like, oh, I should be able to do that, and it shouldn't take that much time at all because I've got a fancy camera. Well, you still have to learn how to use your tools.
Yeah.
You still have to learn how to use your heart and how you want to use those tools. You still have to be able to communicate and deal with people in a great, loving, compassionate way when they're in front of your lens. So all of that, just, it takes time. And I think new photographers especially are kind of given the short end of the stick, that they go and they're listening to a lot of gurus or experts, forgetting that those experts have been in the business 15, 20, 30 years, and not realizing that they didn't start there. They
Hmm.
didn't start where they are now. They all started not knowing if an 2.8 f-stop was open or closed.
Yeah.
Like, we everybody started there. And I think that gets lost in a lot of the communication that is put out to newer photographers these days. So yeah, we all started back where you are. We all had fears when it came to, like, off camera flash. To me, like, coming back to so many people, new photographers say that it's scary. I think it's scary because the people that they listen to make it more than it needs to be.
Yeah.
And if you break it down and realize, okay, this controls this, and then you go out and you play with it a little bit and you start to see how it works, it's not that scary. You have to believe that you can do it. And if something sounds too complicated, that person's probably overcomplicating it, because
Right.
it's not, it isn't, it doesn't need to be difficult, but you do need to practice.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that there's, you know, a few limitations that, uh, you know, when you're new to photography, that is just like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, you know, I can't go above 1/250th of a second or
Yes,
whatever.
yes,
Like,
yeah,
hold on,
yeah.
that's hard. But I mean, as you said, there's so many advancements in technology, and as you continue to practice, you're going to get better. But it's interesting. I was thinking about, you know, when you said that we all started somewhere, and I was thinking about myself and my own journey, and I distinctively remember Googling if I needed to, like, why should I buy a 50 millimeter 1.8 lens if I
Yes.
have an 18 to 55, you know, kit lens that came with it? I was like,
Right. Why do I
the
need that?
yeah, the focal length is in there. Why do I need to buy this? You know, and obviously as time goes on, we get better about those things. But
And the 1.8 to steal.
oh my gosh, I know.
I mean,
It's one of the best lenses, like one of the best values in photography if you're just getting started. Yeah.
yeah, for
So
sure.
for you, when it came to photography, you were talking about looking like over wedding forums earlier. What was it about portraits in particular that really sang to you?
I love faces. 100%. I love faces. I love the flexibility of them. I love the emotions that they show. I love um, looking at pictures of just faces, beautiful faces of all different colors and shapes and sizes and ages and the whole bit. There's just something about a beautiful portrait of a face that just, that's what I love. And so what you see in my portfolio may not reflect that, but every client who comes to me, everyone who gets in front of my lens will walk away with what I consider a beautiful portrait of their face. Um, it's just something that when I get it in every session, I'm just like, yes, that's what it is. It's people. It's photographing faces.
I love how that first photo that you were talking about. It's like this is a silhouette. Like we
Mhm.
don't really see many faces in a silhouette, but it's great to, I think, hear your progression there. It's like, well, it started with this, and obviously there's elements that you can love that aren't necessarily just a single thing and focus on
Yeah.
that. But um, so when it comes to faces, when it comes to wanting to photograph faces, we're not you're not doing headshots, right? So tell me, what are some of the elements that go into a great portrait that aren't necessarily a headshot?
Well, I do headshots, and I
Mm-hmm.
still kind of I lean for the same idea when I'm doing like commercial headshots versus say a child's portrait. Um, Eyes, it's the eyes, getting those eyes really sharp and that connection between the camera and me and the person that they're looking right at me or right at the lens. Um, I love the difference in skin texture and all the different shapes and colors of lips and that type of thing. Just all of it combined is, I just think, something incredibly beautiful.
Mm-hmm. So how do you ensure that every time you show up, let's what was the last portrait session that you did?
Oh, that was actually a headshot for an actor that I
Oh,
did.
okay.
Um, so, and he was older, so he was looking for that connection and different personalities and different styles and that kind of stuff. But if you take a session that I did right before COVID hit, was a family with three children, one set of twins that were five
Perfect.
at that point in time, and then they also brought with them their the mothers, my clients, mother and father, who didn't speak any English. I think they're from Belarus or some
Mm-hmm.
country like that. No English, and also from a culture that does not smile for photography and doesn't have a lot of. They didn't speak English, like I said, but they didn't have a lot of personality even when they did speak, except if they were speaking to the children. But if they were speaking to the adults, it was very, very dry. And I asked, they were getting ready, and the grandpa who didn't speak any English, I just said, can he come sit here and be my light tester? And she told him in their language to come over, and he sat down and he looked at me, and you could tell he was posing in a way that he felt was appropriate for the type of portrait that he was having taken.
Mm-hmm.
He was in a suit. He sat up very tall. He had his feet planted, his hands on both knees, and kind of turned. I turned him a little bit, and he looked straight at the camera, but no, you would think no expression was there whatsoever. But
Mm-hmm.
if I go back and I look at that picture, like I can see that that grandpa was pleased to be in a room with his three beloved grandsons and his daughter and that family, and he was very proud to be sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
So that backstory, the backstory always is appropriate. You got to throw that in too. And then the mother did the same thing. And I had even asked if the grandparents would, um, can he hold her hand? Can he give her a peck on the cheek? Can he put her arm around her? And all of those were met with hard nose.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely not culturally acceptable that they would do that in public, let alone have a public picture taken of them
Yes.
showing that sort of emotion. So I literally have a picture of the two of them facing facing each other, not each other, I'm sorry, facing me, just shoulder to shoulder, facing me straight on. And I'm like, okay, what can I do with this? Like, what can I do with this? And so I just indicated grandma, I said, can you just tilt your head? Just the tiniest bit in towards him. Cause I think they've been married for like 63 years.
Wow.
And I took that shot, and that's the shot that the daughter fell in love with. That's the most emotion that they're ever going to show, or
Mm-hmm.
connection that they're going to show in a portrait. But to be able to take that and see their eyes really, really clearly and their beautiful aged faces, and her just leaning into him just the tiniest little bit to show that they were connected in some way, that's a picture that went on the wall for that family. And so those are the types of connections that I like when I'm looking for just that beautiful head shot. Now, granted, for a toddler, I'm just hoping they're looking at the camera as they're running around,
Sure.
just to get that good. But it's an energy behind the fire in their eyes that you can catch that is so beautiful, that you caught that split moment of time.
In that moment, were you that's a beautiful story, by the way. So thank you for sharing that. In that moment, were you worried that you weren't getting it? Were you nervous that there wasn't enough emotion or excitement or intimacy between these photos? I guess I'm just trying to figure out, if you were to show up in that situation, if I were to show up and photograph a family, I'm thinking fun, excitement, joy, and this is none of those things.
Right,
So,
right.
were you worried inside, or was this an awareness thing of, what, this is who they are, and this is what we're getting?
I think it's a combination of a couple things. One is being in the Washington, D.C. area, I serve a lot of people that don't speak English as a first language, and they're
Mm-hmm.
coming from different cultures. And I've learned to respect that. And I can ask for certain things, but if a client says no or shakes their head or that type of thing, then it's a no. There's no pressing there. It's just like this is it. And so I do worry sometimes that I'm going to be able to capture the connection that they want to see, because ultimately I'm hired by them to get the images that they want. And I
Yes.
can't create something that they're not willing to give me.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I worry, but then ultimately I also realize that sometimes I'm not responsible for it. Like I
Yeah.
can't, if they're not going to cooperate or do what I ask, then I have to work within those confines, and I get that. So no, I don't worry about it too much, but I also want to exceed my clients' expectations. And sometimes for me to do that, I know I have to ask them to step out of their comfort zone because they don't necessarily see what I see. So it's kind of like a dance. Kind
Yeah.
of have to work around it a little bit and pick and choose what you want. Because surprisingly enough, the rest of the session with the two young boys and the son, I mean, we were jumping around. The kids were on dad's shoulders. He was hugging, dad was hugging mom. It was all very much, there was a lot of love and affection in this session. It was a lot of
Mm-hmm.
fun. But when the grandparents came in, it was a different feeling that needed to be captured.
Wow.
So
Did you know this beforehand? Like, do you have some sort of questionnaire asking specifically about the people and what sorts of photos that they're wanting?
I always ask, and I have this on my intake form on my website too, is I always say, if I could capture the perfect image for you, what would that look like?
Yeah.
And it's a very simple question. I get a wide variety of answers. Sometimes it's just like, oh, my newborn baby with their eyes open, or it's, I just want us to show the love of us as a family. Well, I mean, that's great, but
Vague.
that's very, very vague.
Yeah.
So I have learned how to kind of narrow that down a little bit when I'm talking to them, because I always want to talk to my client before I have a session with them. Um, get to know them, get them to hear my voice. See, there's a lot that can be, and this is my vocal training. There's a lot that can be translated with the voice. So I think a phone call is really important. Um,
Yes.
and you just kind of get to know them a little bit better. And sometimes what they put on paper after you've had that conversation, you realize that's not really the image that you need to get, because mom might tell you something totally different. Like she might say on the form, I want a picture of our whole family together. But then when you're talking to her, you realize the most important picture to her is her three children looking at the camera, smiling with a little mischief in their eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm like, okay, well, that's what I need to concentrate on. Yes, I can get the family image. That's fine. I'll knock that out right away. That's not a big deal. But what's going to go on the wall, what they're going to love the most and share with their friends and family are the ones, those three kids with that little twinkle. And so by having that conversation, it helps narrow that down. But like in the situation with those grandparents, no, I did not know what I was looking into. I knew they were coming because I always ask, how many people are going to be there? What are their ages? What do they like? Especially with kids, I like to know like what Marvel heroes do these kids like? And one was Spider-Man and one was Thor. So I love Marvel movies. As a singer, I can sing any princess song needed for all the little girls, all that kind of stuff. So to know what I need to have in my bag of tricks for the successful session, I ask those questions ahead of time. And then also I dig a little deeper in the phone conversation. but the phone conversation is short. It's just for us to get to know each other a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean that's something that again, a lot of photographers, newer photographers, really struggle with, and myself included. You know, the idea of getting on the phone with somebody.
Oh
It's
my
like, what do
gosh.
you? First of all, I hate when my phone rings and I don't know who it is, so it's like now I'm gonna be that person to somebody else, and
Yeah.
you know. What are you talking about? How much are you talking about? I know that you're a huge proponent of in-person sales and
Yeah.
like doing a proper sales session. So, is that where it starts with the phone call?
You're listening to the free version of the Beginner Photography Podcast, where each week you learn how world class photographers see and capture the world around them. If you want to hear the extended interview with their best business tips to learn how to make money with your camera, then become a premium member today by heading over to beginnerphotographypodcast.com and click the premium membership button to join now.
Wonderful.
So
Oh my gosh. You know, it's one of those things again like I was saying, it's so hard to if you get into photography to take photos, the whole business side can be very you know, it can be very uncertain. You're not sure what to do. You feel like you have to be very professional, but then you're told to be very personal. So the way that you broke down, I mean, that whole inquiry process, exactly what to say, and you know, laid out the I guess the flow chart you could say. I know is going to help a lot of photographers. So I want to thank you for that. But
oh, thanks.
of course, I want to move on now
Yeah.
and ask about learning to trust yourself when it comes to the
Yeah.
artistic side of photography, because again, we live in a world with Pinterest, we live in a world with Instagram, and photos can get millions of likes, and then we look at our work and it gets 3, and you know, it can be very discouraging. So how do we learn to trust ourselves when it comes to and our instincts when it comes to creating our art?
I think that this can be done several different ways. And for me, it's happened in a combination of ways. One is I learned the technical aspects of what a good photograph is. I I'll sit like PPA does these image competitions and then they post the judging online and you can sit all day and watch them go through image after image after image after image and you can see the ratings that it's given. And they do
Mm-hmm.
this on a regional level and they also do this on a national level. So if learning how to do this is something that's important to someone, they can hook up with the Professional Photographers Association of America, PPA, and get information about image competitions. So another thing that you can do, and this is not my ball, this is not my specialty. I do not like it. Entering image competitions is not my thing. But if someone really wants that good feedback from people who have been in the business for a long time, they can join image competitions. And if your images start getting good ratings, that can bring your confidence up.
Yeah.
And that's what it comes down to is being able to trust yourself. Well, sometimes just saying you're good enough, we're sensitive creative creatures. You know, we're sensitive
Very much
photographers
so.
and
Yeah.
we have sensitive egos and all that type of stuff. We want everyone to love our art. So sometimes enter an image competition, get some tough love your first couple times, and then you'll start to see your ratings go up. And you can know in the back of your head, okay, I can do this because I've been given these critiques and I know what I'm talking about. I think going and getting good education in how to shoot from people who have been doing it for a long time, I think is also really good. And getting feedback on those images. I personally don't think that most critique groups and that kind of stuff on Facebook are really going to get people where you need to be because that's not where the really great image critiquers or jurors are hanging out. They're
Mm-hmm.
not. They're running studios. They're not hanging out on social media. So there's a few out there, but I say go meet people in the industry. And I hate to keep bringing up PPA, but PPA is a great way to do that. They do these super 1 day classes, 1 day workshops, I think they're called now. And they have them all over the country and you can sign up for them. And I sign up for them every year, even if the subject is something that I'm not particularly interested about.
Mm-hmm.
But it's 1 day, it's $99. You go in and you meet a lot of established photographers who've been doing this a long time. Get to know them, make friends with them, ask them if you go to a workshop during lunch, bring some portfolio work and say, hey, what do you think of this? And get really educated feedback on what you're producing. So being educated and getting that feedback, I think, is one really, really important way for people to get the confidence that they need to move forward. Um, and then I get a lot of confidence and trusting in myself from the feedback that I get from my clients. Like, how do I trust myself? I hear it from my clients all the time when I'm sitting with them or I'm on the phone with them and we're looking at their images. Or I show them the back of my camera during a session and I show them something that I've tried and they agree that it's great. And
Hmm.
not just because it's someone that they love in the picture, but because I've created something that's beautiful with the lighting and everything. Getting that is a way that I can um, feed my feed my tender creative soul with the positive feedback that I need, and also learn to trust myself more because you need that feedback to be able to grow in the trust that you have in yourself. And then you start doing stuff that's different and you see how it's received. And you can see how it's received by your clients. You can see how it's received in social media. You can see if when you post something in your portfolio, someone calls you and says, I want images that look like that,
Yeah.
then you know you're on to something.
Hmm.
And the session that I did with the family, with the grandparents that I spoke about earlier, the reason
Hmm.
she called me specifically, and she was a phone inquiry, she called me specifically was because she saw a session that I did that was very different from my normal. It was not an outside fall foliage picture, whatever. It's very different. She saw what I did for another family. She's like, I want images that look like that. I'm like, oh, maybe I'm onto something here if people are specifically asking for that. So you want to get feedback to help build that kind of bottom layer of things. And then once you get feedback and you realize, okay, yeah, I do have an eye for this. People do like what I'm putting out. And you start to trust your equipment and you play with your equipment so you know what it can do and what it can't do. All of that starts to kind of this snowball effect of being able to trust yourself and what you're putting out into the world. And also know that sometimes stuff you put out into the world isn't necessarily going to fly. And
Hmm.
that's okay too. But realizing that you have the education and the knowledge and everything underneath it to promote, to build the art that you want to build is something that I think really, really helps creatives do that. And a lot of new photographers haven't had the time yet to delve into that, or they haven't given themselves permission to fail at things because they want to be right and have it be perfect right away,
Right.
to start getting that feedback so that you kind of have that cushion of knowing, yeah, I know what I'm doing here. I can I can do this.
Yeah, that's what you touched upon there, right there at the end, is really important because I think probably both you and I, we could show somebody one of our photos, and regardless of what they say, it's not going to change the way that we shoot or do much, right? Unless
Right,
we know
right.
that they're a respected and esteemed member of the photography community. But I do often see a lot of new photographers come into the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook community, who have been maybe in it for a week, and they will ask for feedback on an image right away. And it's just not to the point to where they're still in that experimental phase, right? They're
Yeah.
still just trying to learn how to use their camera and not at the point to where they they know enough about their camera to be able to capture what they see in their head to then be able to ask for feedback to then be able to apply that into their work.
Hmm.
So yeah, I really
Those
think
are
that
the
that's going to help.
hardest. Those are the hardest
Critiques to give.
critiques on social media to give. And when I see them, I always want to encourage them
Yes.
because congratulations, you were brave. And being brave is part of being in this industry and being in this business. Like, you got to be brave. You got to put it out there. But knowing then in the back that they're just, depending on what group it's in, they're just going to get crucified.
Right. Right.
And my lone encouraging voice is probably not going to drown out everyone else who tells them that they're horrible and like, why do they even have a camera? And no wonder your client complained about this. Like, this isn't
Isn't
worthy
that the
of
worst?
anything.
Ugh.
I'm just like, okay, can we do this in a way that doesn't crush their spirit?
Yeah.
Because they're trying, and you want to give people credit for that. We all, like I said, We all started there. We all did it. We all had the horrible session with the bad lighting and the twins and the whole bit when we first started. And we didn't know what to do with it. But good for them for showing up.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. So if you had it your way, I guess, or maybe I guess let me not ask that. For you, when you first started, how long? Let me try to formulate this question. How long do you think you need to be shooting before you should really start to consider others' feedback?
I think other people's feedback is good to consider immediately as long as you keep in perspective where that feedback is coming from.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's the biggest thing, I think, especially in this age of social media and specifically Facebook groups where people will post up an image and you have 100 people replying, but you don't know their background. You don't know how good they are at what they do, how long they've been doing what they do. You don't know if their opinion is really worth anything. So I think you have to remember that, like going back to the PPA competitions, the people who are looking at those images are seasoned photographers. They've gone through training
Yeah.
they of what standards of photography are. Now, granted, I think a lot of images that win PPA competitions are kind of boring, but they've satisfied the basic idea of what is considered a good photograph. So then you can take that and you can creatively spin it in your work and do something that's more creative. But you have to take in consideration where the advice is coming from and the attitude in which it's coming from, because a lot of people just live out there to tear other people down.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people don't realize this, but if you're brave enough to put something out there, that in and of itself is a huge accomplishment. But to be able to take feedback like that and be able to weed through it and see what's good and what's bad. So I don't think you have to have been in business for any certain amount of time to put it out there. In fact, probably sooner is better. But just realize where the feedback, who you're asking for feedback from, and keep it all in perspective and know that everybody started somewhere. And it's the same thing as when we're talking about business, when people say like you ask your friends and family about your pricing structure and they say, oh well, I would never pay that much for photography, or I would
Right.
never, you're never going to be in business very long if you charge those high prices. The first thing that I always say, which always sounds a little bit harsh, is I'm like, oh, your uncle said that? It's like, yeah. How's your uncle's photography business doing?
Yeah. 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 Let's
You
figure out
know,
who it is that we're
who,
getting
where's this
advice
coming
from.
from? Is
Yeah.
he an entrepreneur? Does he know how much it is to stay in business and to start a business and run a profitable business? Or does he just go to work for someone every day and collect a paycheck?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's a very different perspective of things. So keeping all of that in mind, I think is super important for people who are wanting to get into the business.
It's funny. I've had that conversation with my wife, my own wife, many a times,
Yes. Yes.
where she's like, I would never pay that much for photography.
Uh-huh.
And it's like, I totally understand. And yet at the same time, calendar's booked. So
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
there's a disconnect there. Some people value photography different than others, and maybe she's just been spoiled because I'm just always here taking pictures.
Yeah.
And
You're the free hired
yeah,
hand.
exactly why. But it's good because as I trust my wife.
Yeah.
I love her, and I take everything that she says into consideration.
Yeah.
And it's still being honest with yourself and trying to figure out, like, well, I know that this is working because I've tried it with others, or I can do a quick Google search and see that there's 10 other photographers in
Right.
Indianapolis charging $10,000 for
Yes.
weddings. So
Yes.
clearly there's a market for it, and then just trust yourself and
Yeah.
go for it. So that was wonderful. Thank
Absolutely.
you. Thank you. Well, Dory, we're at the end of our time here. We are at the end of our time.
Yeah, we
I
kind of
feel
are.
like we could talk about this all day. This has been a wonderful conversation to
Thank you.
have. Before I let you go, can you let listeners know where they can find you online and discover more about you?
Sure. You can find me on Instagram, and the handle there is the Dorie Howell, and it's DorieHowell. And my portrait website is doriehowell.com. And then for photographers, I have some really great resources. You can get some free stuff for all about teaching business and growing your business. And that's at harmonyhangout.com. And all of those things are linked all throughout the place. So you can find one through the other. But I do a lot of posting on Instagram. I'm loving reels. I'm getting ready to go film another reel on
Nice.
my series called the Struggling Photographers Hotline,
Yeah.
which is super fun. So that'll be posted later today. But yeah, so Instagram, the Dorie Howell, and then harmonyhangout.com.
Perfect. I'm going to put links to all those things in the show
Awesome. Thank
notes.
you.
Dorie, again, thank you so much for coming on, sharing everything that you did. I really look forward to keeping up with you in the future.
Great. Raymond, thank you so much.
There was so much to take away from this episode with Dorie. It's clear that with her experience and her knowledge, she knows what it is that she's talking about. And I'm so thankful that she came on and was able to share even just a small portion of her knowledge with not only me, but you as well, the listeners. I know that you got a lot out of this one. I would love to hear your biggest takeaway in the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook community. What was the thing that you took away from this episode that either you're going to implement into your own photography, or maybe it was a light bulb moment for you? For me, I loved hearing her story about photographing a family, the grandparents not so interested in, doing certain types of photos, whether it be not intimacy, but just holding hands or even kissing or just being close together. And that is not how they see photography. They see it a little bit different. Maybe it's a generational thing. Maybe it is a cultural thing. But regardless, that can leave you feeling super defeated as a photographer. I know that I've left many shoots trying to get a certain shot, not getting it, and being I feel like I'm defeated. But after this conversation with Dorie, maybe you think to yourself, who am I to try to bend them into something that they are not? And if this is who they are and these are the photos that they want to take, why would I try to do anything different? So huge takeaway from me there. I truly love that. Again, I would love to hear your biggest takeaway from this episode in the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook community. Let me know what it is. I'm sure that you had one. So with that, we're going to be done this week. Thank you again so much for joining me. I truly appreciate each and every one of you for showing up and listening and furthering your knowledge and your education in photography and letting me be a part of your journey. So until next week, I want you to keep shooting. I want you to get out, shoot as much as you can, shoot something new, shoot something interesting, do something a little bit different. And that's it. Stay safe. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Beginner Photography Podcast. If you enjoy the show, consider leaving a review in iTunes. Keep shooting, and we'll see you next week.